I guess we should do introductions. I'm Specs, you can call me Jacob if you like. This is Catsman, you can call him Rob, I assume he's okay with that.
No, you can't. You can only call me Catsman.
Alright, you can call him Catsman. What roles did you guys play in making Yo Noid 2 then?
So I'm Dustin. I go by Aska online sometimes. I'm basically the progenitor of the project. I saw that this game jam was happening from this website I follow, and I'm like, I should do this. And then I roped in a bunch of other of these goobers. So I did a lot of programming and, just general design stuff and just kind of helped oversee the thing. So
yeah, for certain we wouldn't be here without him. And I'm Harrison. I tend to go online as Flukes in some circles. And I just did like a lot of stuff all over the place, art, programming, and I also had some work that was kind of already done even before the project started that we, for the sake of time, kind of tapped into. So there's that.
Okay.
All right, and my name is Alex. I go by Axelrod, sometimes Axelrod777. These two had a lot more experience than most people, including myself, on the project, and did a lot of heavy lifting. This was an amateur project for me, my first basically game project, but I went into it just guns blazing. You'll find a lot of the more sloppily put together parts of the game were things I put together. In addition to putting together some of the levels and coming up with a few of the design choices in the game, just in dialogue. I also had kind of like a project manager-ish role by the end of it, where I was just trying to push everyone to get it. Like, let's just get going. Just put it in the game. Doesn't matter. Stop thinking about it. Just go.
Axel's job was valuable. He screamed at people when they needed to be yelled at. And it was there was actually many things in the game that would not have gotten in if Axel did not use some tough love on some of our members, honestly.
And I felt a little bad, but a bunch of people approached me after and said, thank you. This game wouldn't have been what it was without you. So I guess I feel good about it at this point.
How many people were on the team in total?
The credits is the best indication of that. I believe the original release was 17?
There's kind of definitely a core and then a bunch of orbiting participants who contributed very specific things that were really important, but weren't necessarily working on every part of the project as much.
Yeah, so there's Lawrence. He basically only made it so that we could save the game, which is important, but that was a couple of hour thing.
Yeah, none of us knew how to do it, so...
What I wanted to ask you, the burning question on everyone's mind is, why Noid now? Why Noid right now?
Okay, so the inception of this game jam is a community game jam for a website called Waypoint. Their community decided to do a community game jam, and they decided it would be a month long. And the theme of the game jam was picking one of their podcast episodes and using the title of the episode. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to go through all their previous episodes, some of the stuff they talked about. And they had one podcast title that was Yo Noid was ahead of its time. Where they briefly talked about Yo Noid as a game and how it sort of was the inception of the mascot platformer, despite it being really bad. And I'm like, okay, we can build off that. And that was how I pitched it to everybody. It's just let's make a sequel to Yo Noid from the NES.
I mean, it's easy to make a sequel to a bad game in a sense, because you just have to make it less bad than that.
Yeah, the standards are so low.
The standards are so low, and also you have a lot of really specific imagery you can pick out from it, because it was a very specific thing, the Noid game.
The idea started racing so quickly, because it's something that stuck with us the whole time was the whole ahead of its time part of that podcast title made us think, okay, the Noid is so ahead of its time that even though his game came out during the 5th generation N64 or PS1, he's dabbing already because he's just so ahead of his time.
Yeah.
The Noid is the progenitor of the dab within the lore of Yo Noid 2. He came up with it.
And this being a long lost PS1 game, so the idea of just grappling mechanics and Zelda dungeons, the Noid invented all this stuff.
So I really like the whole kind of texture warping in PS1 that you've got going on in the game, and the fisheye lensing sort of thing. How hard was that to implement? And obviously it made it look a lot more like an old school kind of PS1 title.
Yeah, we Googled PS1 shaders for Unity and found a pack. Yeah, we did some tweaking and massaging after the fact, and the VHS shader was something that one of our developers, Sam, was already aware of and suggested to us, and I think Quaid bit the bullet and bought it It's slightly massaged, but basically just cut and paste, slapped in the game, and there you go.
Did you have any history with Yo Noid? Did you ever play the original Yo Noid?
I had heard plenty about the game and had tried it on occasion just in like, I'm going to boot up random NES games and try them, and I've heard of Yo Noid plenty of times. But no, I had never had too much specific experience with it outside of hearing about it and knowing what it looked like.
I had never heard of this goddamn game in my life.
Great.
The reason we know about it and the reason we're so excited about your project actually is because one of our friends, Wooly Shambler, he loves Yo Noid and he insists it's a good game, and I've played it and I can see there's good elements to it, but it's not a good game.
No, there aren't.
The thing you immediately notice about Yo Noid on the NES is just how terrible it controls. It feels really, really bad.
Yeah, definitely.
It's slippery at the start, and then the second level is an ice level, so it's even more slippery.
Yes.
Yeah.
See, I wouldn't even know that. Like, it's just so little knowledge.
Yeah, you guys are teaching me about Yo Noid.
Yeah.
A good segue on this is actually controls, because I've made platformers in the past, and typically with a platformer, you spend like a really long time at the start just with like boxes getting the controls right, because until you know like how far the character can jump, you don't necessarily know how far away to put all of the like platforms and stuff and how high to make all the ledges. So I'm curious as to like how you made a 3D platformer movement in a month and got all of the levels like working and done with that movement.
Can I just say as well, Otterfiend told me that your original prototype for the game was Mario 64's Bob-omb Battlefield, but with the Noid, is that true?
The capsule Noid that you can play in the game, the Cappy, the unlockable character.
Yeah.
There was a point where that was the game on Bomb-on Battlefield and everything was textured of pizza, and that was the project for probably like the first like week, honestly.
And as for like the platforming control specifically, that honestly didn't start really coming together until halfway through the project, and it got to the point where we were running out of time, and that was my primary focus. And it was really stressful at the time.
I can imagine.
To like get that feeling correctly, because we were kind of porting over what Luke's had already been working on in his own time, like his platforming engine. And then by the time we were like, I had spent 2 days just trying to rush to get this thing like workable. We were like, okay, we're running out of time. Let's just use what Flukes has already built and just move on, because this is taking up way too much time.
I believe that was something that I had to yell to us about. Like, we can't keep trying to tweak this platforming engine to make it perfect for a 1 month long game. Just get it working so we can design the levels, because you're right, you can't design the levels until you know how far the character can jump, how far they can wall run, what the tether's capable of doing, and that was a point where we had to reach pretty quick. But a lot of the heavy lifting was done by Flukes ahead of the project, just because he was working on this in his own time.
Right, so like kind of to set the groundwork stage for a lot of that, I had basically been working on my own 3D platformer engines like off and on for like the last like year or two, and I happened to already be making something with a grapple, and we sat there and we thought about the yo-yo, just like that whole angle to Yo Noid, this additional angle.
Oh, right, so that was how the yo-yo came into it. It was like a pre-existing idea that you realized you could like bolt on.
Pretty much. It was like, oh, I already made these like crappy grapple mechanics, but we can justify it with this yo-yo.
Because that kind of ended up being the linchpin of most of the platforming in the game.
And that's the thing about the original Yo Noid, is the yo-yo didn't really play into that game that much, whereas ours is like pivotal to the action.
You say crappy grappling mechanics. I love the way the grappling works in this game. Have you ever played Umihara Kawase?
I was definitely aware of it.
The way the grappling feels, it's got proper physics in Yo Noid 2, and I've often said, oh, it's like Umihara Kawase but in 3D, because it's got proper, like, you can bungee off it if you're falling fast enough and you grapple something. I really like how you can use the speed from a grapple into a wall run and stay grappled, so then you can swing around stuff. I think the platforming mechanics are actually really good in Yo Noid 2. So to hear that you just kind of had it floating around and then kind of shoved it into this project, it's like, it's really cool. I think it's really good.
Honestly, a lot of the dev time early on was actually spent making the grapple mechanics not bad. Because when I say crappy grapple mechanics, like the Progenitor project, they were pretty bad. But like a lot of that initial effort went into just making them work better. Like pulling objects around, getting pulled by objects that are influencing you. All these things like didn't really exist. It was basically nothing but you click a button and you will be like tethered to this position and you won't be able to go further away than that. It's basically all that existed prior.
Oh, okay, right.
But yeah, we felt like we were cheating though, which is why in a way we took everything we had and said let's remake it, but very quickly, right?
That was always my big hang-up, was that this was supposed to be for a game jam, and bringing in all that existing tech felt bad to me in a way, but by the time this thing ballooned into what it did, I started to care a little less and less about that aspect of it and just wanted to make something cool in the time that we had, so...
It is hard to know where to draw the line when it comes to things you can reuse, because we are already using an entire game engine by making it in Unity.
Yeah.
Whereas other people are making it from scratch, and there's a lot. If you're going to take one system that was made ahead of time and also put it in on top of your game engine, like, it's a matter of like beliefs and semantics at that point, what from scratch really means in today's day and age.
Yeah, we had a self-awareness by the end of this project, though, that this project had outgrown this game jam, that it had become something more. Like, we were self-aware by the end. We were like, okay, this doesn't matter. We've made something pretty cool.
When I suggested this thing that we do, I could not have even began to tell you that it would have turned into what it turned into. This thing is so much bigger and fully featured than I could have ever expected it would have been.
No, I totally agree. I mean, if you really want to start from scratch, you'd first have to invent a computer and stuff. So,
Yeah.
on that topic, what was the worst thing to get working of everything in the game? Because I notice a lot of like weirdly ambitious things, like, you know, spherical planetoids and stuff. I was going to ask, like, what thing was the most pain in the ass?
I had the spherical planetoids working with the precursor kind of engine, so we kind of just got to inherit that.
Yeah, a lot of that was just cleanup work, so it was less implementation and more just cleanup work on that.
If Quaid was here, he could probably attest to it, because like in the last week of that project, Quaid basically didn't sleep or eat, actually. And he was just destroying himself to get done the Domino dungeon, which I would say in many ways was probably like the most grueling part of this project.
Yeah, if you take any one single part of it, the Domino dungeon and Quaid's devotion to everything, the game minus his life, that's definitely probably the most pain in the ass part of this whole thing.
Okay, that's sort of the area right at the end of the game, right, with the boss fight.
No, the Domino dungeon is the third level, the Zelda dungeon.
Oh, the Zelda dungeon. Sorry,
Yes,
yeah.
that whole level.
I can imagine that was hell to work.
Yes.
Whose idea was that? Because that's my favorite level.
That was all Quaid.
That entire thing was Quaid. He was inspired by Mark Brown's Zelda Boss Keys series to create one of those maps. He came up with pretty much every mechanic in that dungeon, including pulling crates into holes, the platforms that would flip as they timer ticks. He textured the walls. He wrote the song.
Oh, wow.
This entire corner of the game was entirely carved out by him over a week of destroying his health for the sake of the project.
I have to say, I was so impressed by that dungeon because it felt very Zelda. I loved the central room with the sort of things just keep getting added to it so that you can progress further in the dungeon. It really felt like you had a great sense of progression, and keeping that central room as the key element of it was just so cool. I'd love to see more of that.
It's my favorite part of the game for sure. Like,
Same.
yeah.
It's something I've not really seen in a platformer before either. Like that depth of puzzle solving. I've never seen like a dungeon platformer before. It was so cool.
And it ended up being this thing, we definitely wanted it to be like the cap off for the core level progression. It got to the point where we were like, this thing is so much bigger and more complicated than our other levels. We need to like make sure people are prepared for it. That's why we have a character in there who tells you to come back later, because it requires so much knowledge of our mechanics. We wanted to make sure that people were comfortable enough to tackle it, because there's just so much you have to do in that level. It's really impressive how much is in it. It's kind of crazy.
And Quaid was intelligent enough like to make the first room skill check you on everything you need to do the rest of the dungeon.
Yeah, I noticed that because I ended up there first when I was playing, and I sort of bounced around a bit, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, and then I left, and I came back, and I was like, oh, I could have done this right at the start if I'd just known.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like that was the issue, is that Quaid's plans for it were so lofty.
Yeah.
And he spent so much time thinking about it without actually doing any work, just like conceptualizing, that it got to be like the last week and he hadn't even started actually producing it. And he just killed it though. Like, killed himself, but he killed it.
He killed it and killed himself.
Metaphorically. What I always found amusing was that the reason this was a 1 month long game jam was because most game jams are a weekend or a week, and what that means is people grind. They grind and grind and grind to get a game out in an extremely short amount of time. They gave us a month so that we wouldn't have to grind and hurt ourselves so much. So instead of pacing out a game jam over a month, we just did a weekend game jam for an entire month and just grinded out the entire time.
On that note, so this game jam, did you get any kind of like renown from this? Did you win anything? Like, I haven't seen anything else from the game jam, so I don't know what you were up against, but what was the outcome?
I've been part of other communities that are similar to this website that hosted this one that have done game jams, and it's been like you get recognition and the people who run the site play it. This was a community-run thing that they barely talked about, and I don't think even to this day the people who run the website have played our game. They've at least made mention of it, but I don't think they've ever played it. And our entry in that game jam was one of like 4 entries, and the size and scope of our thing did not fit the jam that we were a part of, which I always found really funny. It's tied to this thing that like no one really took part in and no one really saw until our game got more popular. It's always been really funny to me because the jam itself was not notable in like any way whatsoever.
Have Domino's ever contacted you about the game? Either to say like, this is cool, or why are you infringing our copyright, or something along those lines?
This is actually something interesting that Nick could have gone into, and I don't know how much can or should we have said or say about this stuff. I don't know. What are your...
We can say whatever we want. There was no agreement.
I mean, I guess that's true. You know, Nick worked on Strafe, right?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
And so he has contacts with like Totino's because of their business deal with that game.
Mm-hmm.
And like, as far as I'm aware, at some point he managed to make a connection with Domino's corporate, like at some point. And the door was almost kind of opened that Yo Noid could become more and possibly even some kind of official representation or marketing. But the problem is we were also burnt out that we would have had to produce basically an entire pitch for them, and none of us had the energy to do it, basically. We were so sick of Noid and working on it and working on games every fucking waking moment that we were just like, you know, this is an awesome opportunity and this would be really cool, but none of us have the energy to do this right now.
No, I appreciate that. It's not worth your own mental health, I think, projects that you work on.
I really wanted to do it. I really did, but like the energy just wasn't there. Like whenever it came up, the entire team had a collective about it.
Yeah, I definitely remember that feeling because I remember hearing about it myself and just being like, that sounds so cool. And like, it's insane that this is happening, but I'm just like, I kind of don't even want to look at this. I just want to, at least for a little bit, just move on, chill.
Yeah, I was kind of ready to go all in on it, frankly. I actually really wanted it to happen personally, but...
So they're at least a little bit aware of it, even though nothing ever happened with it.
At one point, they were open to the idea of getting a pitch, and if our pitch was good, maybe it would have happened. That's about as far as it goes.
Yeah, that's basically it. But as far as I can tell, they certainly know about the game's existence, and they are just happy that they are getting free advertising, and they're just not bothering us. I don't think they're ever going to really give us any problems over it.
One of the things we were going to do for our pitch, though, because it was something that we noticed, was that every time someone would build the first section of the pizza tower, and they would walk up to it, and they'd see the texture, like the really crappy low-res PS1 texture, it still was appetizing enough that they would all say, man, I could go for some Domino's right now. And we were like, we need to leverage that. They're gonna want that in the game.
We have a compilation video of just streamer after streamer, person playing our game being like, man, Domino's, that sounds pretty good right now. Just mentioning the fact that we're advertising their company. We come through so many videos. We had a whole section of our like Discord being like, okay, any mentions you get that we can use for this thing, post them here.
So is there anything that you wanted to put in the game that didn't manage to make it in, or anything you'd rather have tweaked a bit to make it work better?
This relates back to one of our earlier discussions about being ahead of its time. An early concept we had was that the Noid was going to climb Assassin's Creed-style towers in order to open up sections of the map. Because he was so ahead of his time, he invented the open world. And that's originally kind of what the Noid Void was going to be. And we ended up putting in one tower in the game, but it was not to the same effect.
The original pitch that I came up with was like, it was very much going to be in the style of Assassin's Creed. As Axel said, you're going to climb these towers. And the idea was you get to the top of the tower, and instead of like opening up the map to showing you different points of interest, you were instead opening up the ability to go to different like Domino's franchises nearby. Like that's what you were uncovering. And we also had an idea, Breath of the Wild style, where you were going to be able to shield surf on pizza boxes. That was also an early idea that we wanted to have happen. And it ended up not working into what the game ended up being. But that was an early idea very much, was like, you're going to be able to surf on a pizza box. It's going to be really awesome, just like Breath of the Wild. And climb these towers and find Domino's franchises.
Making an open world quickly was like, I don't know if we can we can do this. Because even the game as it is now, we were originally not going to have level select where you go through the warps to get to stages. We wanted it to all be like a coherent walk from A to B. We wanted all the levels to exist in like a single instance. Yeah, time just gets away from us, and we were all designing levels separately, and we were just realized, okay, we can't make this work. We just have to tie them together.
And I think in the end, having the Noid Void, which if people don't realize this, that's totally from the commercials, like the original Noid commercials. He exists in that space. That's what that's like modeled off of. I really enjoy that aspect of the game. It's one of my favorite parts, is having that tie back to the commercials in such a weird, specific way.
I had no idea. I never watched any of the Noid commercials. I probably missed out on countless bits of lore that was referenced in this game.
Down to like the stop signs and like the weird architecture that some of the like the Domino dungeon entrance, like that little structure that pizza box lives in. That's all straight out of those commercials, which is just
Wow.
My only exposure to the Noid was the DOS game Avoid the Noid, which I also wouldn't recommend.
That's also another funny thing, is that we turned Noid into this kind of like, he's still kind of an asshole, but he's kind of like endearing, when originally like the Noid actually kind of sucks. He's this evil little guy who makes your pizza suck, and like we've turned him into kind of this endearing character.
No, he's reformed. This is the character arc that we've had. Now he's a former bad boy.
This is the character arc that Yo Noid established. Like, the first Yo Noid was actually the basis. Like, thank God it expanded the lore so much, because that game gave us so much more to work with. Between, like, the Yo-Yo having Mr. Green as, like, a rival. The idea that the Noid was now this, like, hero who was saving New York's pizzas for whatever reason. Despite that, like, being the complete opposite of his character, that game went with that. And we realized that there was just so much more potential.
Because, like you said, the slogan for that character was literally "Avoid the Noid." He's not your friend, but here we are.
Yeah.
That brings up a good question, which is, who wrote this game? Did you all like collaborate on the various little bits of like dialogue in the game?
I did a lot of it. Cass, she did most of that final dialogue with Mike that's just pun after pun after pun after pun.
Yeah, it's very good.
I really do love the puns.
She was incredibly proud of a lot of the jokes she wrote for the game.
Just the fact that his name is Mike Hatsune is great.
Well,
so
what's good is there's actually an image you could already find online of this guy named Mike Hatsune. And it was already like this inside joke, just like the idea that Miku's dad is just out there. It's just a person that you can just name Mike. And it just all clicked, where we were like, I don't know, we have to do this.
Yeah, it did click. Like, the Hatsune Miku thing I had seen, and it was the one bit of obscure Domino's lore where I was like, I really hope this comes up. So I was so glad when it did.
I do want to make sure I give credit. A lot of people did, in fact, contribute random pieces of dialogue. Brett O'Top wrote quite a bit. Levis wrote some. That's Levi.
Yeah, so much of it was us just sitting around, like, throwing puns at a wall and just laughing. And if we laughed, then it went in. Like,
Whose idea was it to let you dab in dialogue sections as well? Because that's great. That just makes the dab so much better.
When we had the original dab idea, pretty much all of us unanimously said there should be no situation where you can't dab.
Yes.
And I don't remember which one of us decided to extend that to the dialogue. We knew we wanted there to be no limitations to it. I can't remember the specific inception of like the light bulb of being like, wait, we should be able to do it in the dialogue scenes too. I don't remember who said that actually. I know it was part of our philosophy of the dab.
all I do remember is that when we were sitting around talking about this, whoever first said it made everyone in the room just die, like choking. Like, they were all laughing so hard.
We knew that was going to be the thing.
Yeah. So we invested that time in making, like, the dialogue system. Aska was writing it. He had to actually, like, plan for this feature from the get-go that you'd be able to do this. And we had to get all the art for every character to make sure you could dab.
Cool. Is there anything in terms of playtesting that you noticed the playtesters had a difficult time with, or people you've seen stream the game or play the game after it's come out that you thought, oh, maybe we could have signposted that better, or, you know?
Oh, I know. Pronouncing the word chutzpah.
There you go. The thing that I consistently see people have the most trouble with, that personally irks me just because of how the entire thing came in pretty hot, is during the final boss fight, flinging the dice at Mike. I noticed that some people get it right away and they have no issue whatsoever, but some people really struggle, and basically the entire game halts during that boss fight because they just can't get it down.
I found it quite difficult, to be honest.
I think a lot of that comes down to A, there's being no setup to that mechanic. Like, you have one thing right before the boss room that shows you can even do that. And B, a lot of people turn this off, but if you have the auto camera turned on, it makes that fight 100 times easier with the auto cam turned on, because you're able to kind of follow him and spin the dice around at the same time. But I think that's the one thing that I would want to have paid more attention to. Because that whole final boss fight came in together really hot at the end. Like, all the disparate parts were being worked on separately, and it kind of all got put together really, really close to the end.
Yeah, that boss fight was basically the last day of development, more or less. And I think it was the only time I've ever seen Asuka here, like, pull an all-nighter on anything.
And the boss fight ended up being one of my favorite. As the music came in, as Flux's animations came in, as the dialogue came in, because that's the only character that's voiced, like full voice lines in the text. As all that came together at once, the first time that he like finished his dialogue, he says, "Let's dance." You close the dialogue, the music starts, and he floats above the boss fight. I'm like, okay, we did something really cool here. I really enjoy that whole sequence for what it is.
I really like the music in that sequence as well.
Oh, I love it.
We had a theory when I was streaming it about the dice blocks for the final boss as well. And we wondered, why aren't they actual dominoes? And is it just because they roll better, or is that not something that was discussed?
Yes. It's just because I roll better.
I remember we had many discussions about what those should actually be and what should be on them. It took us actually a long time to finally decide what those things were supposed to be and look like.
We were arguing because everyone was like, dice make no sense. Why would they do dice?
The only reason dice make any sense at all is because if you fold some dominoes, you can kind of make it look like dice. But other than that, like, there's no reason for them to be dice whatsoever.
Originally, the dice had the blue and red pips on the sides during really early releases of the game. But when people got to these dice and saw that, like, 4 of the sides were orange, but 1 was red and 1 was blue, they immediately just start rolling the dice so that all the red sides are up. And we're like, okay, we've given them too much information.
Right, okay. So people thought it was a puzzle rather than, like, what they're supposed to do.
Even then, people get to that part a lot in the game, and they just start, like, rotating the dice to make, like, 666, or to try and, like, spell something, and they're just like, nothing's happening.
We had a discussion about this earlier, because to me it was intuitive that I throw it through the screen, because it's a reference to that, like, advert from, I don't know when it's from, right?
It's from 1984, but yeah, that ad is an Apple ad, totally.
Yeah, so we were talking about this earlier, and Katz didn't get the reference until I mentioned it, so I guess if you didn't know...
I'd seen the advert, and I knew to throw the dice, but I just didn't put 2 and 2 together.
Because that's the reason I knew to do it, but I can imagine if you didn't sort of have that in the back of your head, then you might not realise.
If you're playing a game about the Noid, I think you've already been selected demographically that you'll be familiar with that advert.
I think the surprising and funny thing you'll find there is that I made that part, and it was 100% unintentional. Like, I was fully aware of that advert. I had seen it, and maybe it was subconscious on some level, but I just needed some way to teach you how to use the dice. And there were already TV screens all over the stage, so I just put a big one and cracked it and figured people would think, oh, you can probably break this somehow to teach people. So, I don't know, things just kind of came together there, and literally everyone who plays that part brings up the commercial, and I'm like, okay, I mean...
Not only do they bring up the commercial, that commercial lets them know immediately what they're supposed to do.
No, just act like you intended all of that.
Oh, yeah.
And it was really clever.
I mean, it works really well because, like, such a happy accent that people get there and they just know what to do without, like, completely not by my own merit.
Conveyance is difficult. You don't know until someone who's never seen your game before sits down and tries to play it that you've made a bad assumption. Pretty much both instances of the pineapple character were added after the fact to make things clearer that we didn't make clear. That you had to grapple the bottom of the rocket, and that the Domino dungeon was meant to be the final level, not something you're supposed to walk straight into because we made it the easiest one to find.
Yeah.
That was a terrible thing. That rocket. That rocket.
The rocket.
Yeah.
We thought we had made it clearer that like the bright orange is our grapple signifier, so we had a ring around the bottom of the rocket that was bright orange. But like pretty much no one ever picked up on that. They would all like sit there for way longer than we wanted them to.
Whatever you did to fix it, definitely I managed to do it without thinking too hard about it. So I think I talked to the character a couple of times beforehand, though.
It incepted the idea that you had to do the bottom because the character mentions it directly.
Yeah.
But yeah, the pineapple didn't exist in the first release, but we quickly like added that in one of kind of more quiet updates, and so it pretty quickly became part of the game.
Great. Okay. Have you got any more questions, Kat?
No, I mean, I was going to ask if there's anything that's been burning you guys up that you want people to know about the game, but otherwise I'm all out.
What's something that no one's figured out yet? Should we even bring it up if there's something exists?
Leave it as a mystery forever.
I think someone did discover something recently about the music in the game.
Ah, yeah, that is something someone actually realized.
We have an inside joke that boils down to a 6-note melody. It sounds something like ba-da-da-da-da-da, and we basically snuck that into every single song in the game somewhere. And people have only just recently found that it's basically all over the game.
I should be looking for that. That's what you're telling me. I should be looking for clues. Maybe it means something. Maybe it's a ciphered message. I'll find out.
The only other thing I guess I want to ask is, are you guys planning to make another game, maybe not Noid, because obviously you've not really got the rights to him, but something with the same mechanics? Because I really like it. I would want to play more of this. And, you know, I don't care if it's Noid or not, but I want to play something that's got these mechanics again, because I love it. And that Zelda dungeon especially, if you made a whole game that was like that, I'd be down for that.
The good news is we're always making something. The bad news is we can't promise anything right now. Lots of stuff just never comes to fruition.
Yeah, I mean, we're a creative group and we love working together, but like our lives are all very disparate these days, and it's hard to like pull things together.
The inception of Noid was very much, everything came together at just the perfect time. It was the middle of the summer, and we were all just sitting around. We had nothing to do. We all came together, and a lot of the people on that team, like we said before, had never even done any game dev whatsoever. Some of us are super experienced at it. Others were not so much. But yeah, like they said, we're always just like working on stuff. We like collaborating, and it's just that was such a happy accident of like everyone's timing just coming together. It was pretty cool.
Did you ever check out the game that at least a small handful of the developers made for another game jam?
It's a very different game. It's not the same thing at all. But we made a small game called Breakpoint for a different game jam, and that was just kind of a fun side project. The majority of the work on that project was Quaid and Sam, and I did a little bit of help with the art. That's
Cool.
Yeah.
Where's the best place to find you guys if I want to look at your upcoming projects? Have you got a website or like a team name or anything that we can follow?
The credits of that game have all of our social media.
The best place is probably to look at the credits for Yo Noid, and it links to all of our respective places.
Our Twitters, our Itch.ios, and you know, again, we're all creative people, and I'd like to hope that we'll continue to produce things of some sort.
Great.
Okay, fair enough. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for talking to us.
Yeah.
I'm really glad we could talk about this game in a public capacity.
Yeah, it's really nice.
I heard someone wanted to interview us, and everyone was like, dude, you should come do this. I'm like, that sounds super fun and awesome and kind of weird. So I'm thankful that you guys wanted to come talk to us.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all very much, and look forward to seeing what you guys are doing in future.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you
Thank
for
you
having
very
us.
much for having us on.
Okay, so long, I guess.